The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest structure ever built by any species in known space. Its walls stretched upward for nearly a mile, carved from living crystal that had been grown over 10,000 years. Representatives from over 200 species sat in their designated sections, their bodies ranging from humanoid to completely alien. Some breathed oxygen, others methane, and a few existed as pure energy contained in special chambers. Today, the hall was completely silent. Ambassador Verketh of the Theyre Empire stood at the central speaking platform, his 4 eyes scanning the assembled delegates with pride. He was tall by Theyrean standards, nearly 8 feet, with dark blue scales covering his muscular body. His military decorations covered his chest, each one representing a conquered world. The Theyre Empire formally announces its intention to bring the planet known as Earth under our protection, he declared, his voice booming through the translation systems. Our fleet of 3,000 warships will depart within the month. The silence that followed was different from before. It was the silence of shock, of disbelief, of something close to horror. High Counselor Yelmara was the first to speak. She was a being of living crystal, her body shifting through colors as emotions passed through her ancient mind. She had served on the council for over 400 years and had seen many strange things, but this announcement genuinely surprised her. Ambassador Verketh, she said carefully. Perhaps you misspoke. Did you say Earth? The human homeworld. Verketh's scales shifted in a pattern that indicated pride. I did not misspeak, High Counselor. Earth will become the newest addition to our glorious empire. Across the chamber, a strange sound echoed. It took a moment for Verketh to realize it was laughter. The Philithian delegate, a cat-like being covered in silver fur, was laughing so hard that tears streamed from his large yellow eyes. Something amuses you, Delegate Kurth? Verketh demanded, his voice cold. Kurth struggled to compose himself, his whiskers twitching with leftover amusement. Forgive me, Ambassador. I mean no disrespect. But you clearly have not consulted the restricted archives before making this announcement. What archives? File designation Omega-7, Kurth said, suddenly serious. The one our founders sealed 800 years ago. The one that requires unanimous council approval to open. I suggest you read it before you send your fleet anywhere near that system. Verketh waved a dismissive hand. Theyrean intelligence has thoroughly analyzed the humans. They are a young species, barely 300 years into space travel. Their fleet numbers, less than 300 vessels. They pose no threat to our armada. Another delegate spoke up. This one was harder to look at directly, its body existing partially in dimensions that most species could not perceive. It was a Vethkai, one of the oldest races in the galaxy. Ambassador, the Vethkai said, its voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. We have watched humans for a very long time. Numbers do not matter when dealing with their kind. Your 3,000 ships could be 3 million, and the outcome would be the same. You speak in riddles, Verketh snapped. The Theyrean Empire has conquered 17 species. Our military technology is the most advanced in this sector of the galaxy. What could these primitive apes possibly do against us? The Vethkai made a sound that might have been a sigh. You will learn. They all learn eventually. Some lessons must be experienced to be understood. Verketh had heard enough. These soft council species had grown weak and fearful. The Theyrean Empire had not achieved its greatness by listening to warnings and superstitions. He turned and walked out of the chamber, his military advisors following close behind. On the other side of the galaxy, 14,000 light-years away, Commander Lisa Hartwell received the intelligence report at exactly 0700 hours, Geneva time. Her office was simple and functional, decorated only with a few photographs and a small plant that she constantly forgot to water. She was 47 years old, with short gray hair and sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. She had served in the United Earth Defense Force for 25 years, rising through the ranks through a combination of tactical brilliance and an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. She read the report twice, her expression unchanged. Then she pressed the communication button on her desk. Captain Price, please report to my office. Daniel Price arrived within 3 minutes. He was younger than Lisa, maybe 35, with the kind of easygoing manner that hid a razor-sharp mind. He had been her second-in-command for 5 years, and she trusted him completely. "What do we have?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. Lisa handed him the tablet. "The Dralians are coming." Daniel read the report quickly, his eyebrows rising slightly. 3,000 ships? That's their full battle fleet. According to our sources, yes. Do they know something we don't? Secret weapon. Alliance with another power? Lisa shook her head. No, they simply think we're weak. Young species, small fleet, primitive technology, the usual assumptions. Daniel set down the tablet and leaned back in his chair. So, standard response? Standard response. Good. Should I alert the Planetary Defense Council? Set up a meeting for tomorrow morning. No need to rush. We have at least a month before they arrive. Daniel stood to leave, then paused at the door. Commander, do you ever feel sorry for them? The ones who come to invade us, I mean? They never seem to know what they're getting into. Lisa considered the question. Sometimes, but they make their choices. We simply show them the consequences. After Daniel left, Lisa turned to look out her window. The sun was rising over Lake Geneva, painting the water gold and orange. It was beautiful, peaceful. On mornings like this, it was hard to believe that humanity had been defending itself against alien invasions for nearly 3 centuries. The first one had come when humans were still using chemical rockets and primitive space stations. A Volanthi scout ship had arrived expecting easy conquest. Instead, they had found a species unlike any they had ever encountered. A species that refused to surrender, refused to accept defeat, refused to die quietly. That first invasion had ended with humans, capturing alien technology and using it to build their own fleet within a decade. The second invasion, 20 years later, had ended even worse for the attackers. And so it had continued, each new threat met and destroyed. Each new technology studied and improved. Now, 300 years later, humanity stood as one of the most quietly dangerous species in the galaxy. They did not seek war. They did not build empires. They simply wanted to explore, trade, and live in peace. But when someone threatened that peace, they responded with a fury that had become legendary in certain circles. The Dralians would learn this lesson soon enough. They always did. Lisa turned away from the window and began preparing for the council meeting. There was work to be done. The restricted archive was located deep beneath the Galactic Council building, in chambers that had not been opened for centuries. The walls here were made of a strange black material that absorbed all light, and the air was cold and still. Very few beings had ever walked these halls, and fewer still had returned unchanged. Ambassador Verketh stood before the sealed door, waiting as the ancient security systems verified his identity. He had demanded access to the Omega-7 file immediately after leaving the council chamber. The council had granted his request with unusual speed, almost as if they wanted him to see what was inside. The door opened with a sound like a dying breath. Inside, the chamber was circular and empty, except for a single pedestal in the center. Above the pedestal floated the archive keeper, a being of pure energy that had served the council since its founding. It had no face, no body in the traditional sense. It was simply a presence, ancient and patient. Ambassador Verketh of the Dralian Empire, the keeper said, its voice gentle, but somehow terrifying. You wish to access the human files? I do. You understand that what you see cannot be unseen. Many who have viewed these records have chosen to forget. Others could not. Verketh's scales shifted impatiently. I am a soldier of the Empire. I do not fear historical records. Then let us begin. The chamber filled with light, and suddenly Verketh was no longer standing on solid ground. He was floating in space. Watching events that had occurred 2,000 years ago, a Volanthi scout ship approached a small blue planet. The Volanthi had been the dominant power in the galaxy at that time. Their technology so advanced that other species seemed like children in comparison. They had come to Earth expecting to find primitive creatures, easily conquered and enslaved. The recording showed what they found instead: The humans of that era had no space travel. No advanced weapons, nothing but bronze swords and wooden ships. By every measure of galactic civilization, they should have been helpless. But within 3 days of the Valanthi landing, something impossible had happened. The humans had captured the scout ship. Verkith watched in disbelief as primitive warriors somehow overwhelmed the Valanthi crew. They used tactics that made no logical sense, sacrificing themselves in waves to learn how the alien weapons worked. They adapted in real time, developing countermeasures through pure trial and error. And when the Valanthi captain tried to destroy the ship rather than let it fall into human hands, a human soldier had already disabled the self-destruct mechanism. How? Verkith whispered, which the archive keeper said. The recording jumped forward 1 year. The humans had completely reverse-engineered the Valanthi technology. Not just copied it, but improved upon it. Scientists who should have taken centuries to understand alien physics had somehow done it in months. Another jump, 10 years later. Earth now had its own fleet of starships. They had not only matched Valanthi technology, they had surpassed it. The Valanthi Empire sent a full invasion force in response. 200 ships, the greatest armada they had ever assembled. None of them survived. The Valanthi Empire collapsed within 50 years of first contact with humanity, the archive keeper said. They were the first, but not the last. The recording shifted to a new scene. This time, it was the Kathrani Collective, a hive mind species that had conquered a quarter of the galaxy through sheer numbers. They had sent 1 million soldiers to Earth, as confident that no species could stand. Against such overwhelming force, the humans had developed something called a gravity bomb. One device, no larger than a human fist, had created a singularity that swallowed the entire Kathrani fleet. 1 million soldiers, reduced to a point of matter smaller than a grain of sand. How did they develop such a weapon so quickly? Verkith asked, his voice now small. That is the wrong question, the archive keeper replied. The correct question is, why do they develop such weapons at all? The answer is simple. Humans do not accept defeat. When faced with impossible odds, they do not surrender. They innovate. They adapt. They find a way. More recordings followed. The Morthok dynasty, who had thought their psychic abilities made them invincible. The humans had developed neural shielding within a week and turned the Morthok's own powers against them. The Crystalline Collective, beings of living mineral who believed they were indestructible. The humans had created sonic weapons that shattered them like glass. Species after species had come to Earth seeking conquest. Species after species had been destroyed, absorbed, or driven to extinction. Enough, Verkith said finally. I have seen enough. The visions faded, and he was back in the archive chamber. His legs felt weak, and he had to steady himself against the pedestal. There are 400 more recordings, the archive keeper said. Each one tells a similar story. In 3,000 years of contact with other species, humanity has never lost a war. They have been pushed back, wounded, nearly destroyed. But they have never been defeated. Why? Verkith asked. What makes them different? Many have asked that question. The best answer we have is this. Most species evolve to survive. Humans evolve to win. They do not simply resist threats. They eliminate them. And they learn from every enemy they face. Your weapons will become their weapons. Your tactics will become their tactics. Your technology will become their technology. And then they will improve upon all of it. Verkith stood in silence for a long moment. His mind was racing, trying to process what he had seen. Everything he believed about his empire, about military power, about the nature of conquest, had been shattered in the span of an hour. But he was Dralian. And Dralans did not retreat. My military advisors will review this information, he said finally, straightening his posture. We will adjust our strategy accordingly. You still intend to invade? The archive keeper asked. The Dralayan Empire has never known defeat. Perhaps we are the exception to your records. The archive keeper made a sound that might have been sadness. That is what they all say, Ambassador. That is what they all say. On Earth, The Planetary Defense Council had finished their meeting. The mood was calm, almost casual. They had faced threats like this before, and they would face them again. Dr. Patricia Lang, the council's chief scientist, was particularly excited. The Tokyo lab finished the phase shift prototype last week. This could be a perfect opportunity for a field test. Lisa Hartwell nodded thoughtfully. What are the capabilities? We can remove objects from normal space-time, essentially making them exist a few seconds out of sync with reality. They'll float harmlessly in a parallel dimension until we bring them back. Casualties? None. The targets are perfectly preserved. They don't even realize anything has happened. General Kevin Marshall, commander of the North American sector, leaned forward. You want to use an untested weapon against a full invasion fleet? What better test is there? Patricia replied with a smile. Lisa made her decision quickly. Approved. But we'll also prepare standard defenses as backup. Captain Santos, your Marines will be on standby for boarding operations. Captain Henry Santos, a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and calm eyes, nodded. My teams are ready, Commander. We've been training for close-quarters combat with Draliant-type physiology. How did you know to prepare for Draliant specifically? Lisa asked. Santos smiled slightly. We prepare for everyone, Commander. It's what we do. The meeting adjourned with assignments distributed and timelines established. In 1 month, the Dralian fleet would arrive. They expected easy conquest. They would find something very different. The Dralian fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, and for a moment, even Verkith felt a surge of pride at the sight. 3,000 warships, each one a masterpiece of Dralian engineering, stretched across the void in perfect formation. Their hulls gleamed with the characteristic blue-black metal of the Empire, and their weapons bristled from every surface like the spines of some massive sea creature. Admiral Kethfer stood beside Verkith on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Conquest. He was older than the ambassador, his scales faded to a pale blue with age, but his 4 eyes were still sharp and his mind still keen. He had led the Dralian military for 40 years and had never known defeat. All ships report battle-ready, Ambassador, Kethfer said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. We will reach Earth in approximately 6 standard hours. Verkith nodded, but he could not shake the unease that had settled in his chest since viewing the archive recordings. He had shared those recordings with his military advisors, as he had promised. They had dismissed them as propaganda, clever lies designed to frighten potential invaders. The Dralian Empire had conquered 17 species, they reminded him. They knew war. They knew victory. And yet something felt wrong. Admiral, what are our long-range sensors showing? Kethfer consulted his displays. The human homeworld is directly ahead. We detect approximately 200 vessels in their defense fleet. Mostly smaller craft, nothing comparable to our heavy cruisers. He made a sound of contempt. They cannot hope to match us in direct combat. And the planet itself? 9 billion inhabitants. Major population centers spread across several continents. Their orbital defenses appear minimal. Kethfer turned to face Verkith directly. Ambassador, with respect, I have studied every record we have of human military capability. They are clever, yes, resourceful, but they are not gods. They can be defeated like any other species. Verkith wished he could share that confidence. 2 hours into their approach, the first anomaly appeared. A junior officer spoke up, his voice uncertain. Admiral, I am detecting an unusual energy signature directly ahead. It appears to be expanding. Kethfer moved to examine the readings himself. The signature was unlike anything in their databases, a rippling distortion in the fabric of space itself. It was growing rapidly, spreading across their projected path like an invisible wave. What is it? Verkith demanded before anyone could answer. The distortion reached the Dralian vanguard. 300 ships simply vanished. There was no explosion. No debris, no distress signals. One moment they were there, flying in perfect formation. The next moment they were gone, as if they had never existed at all. The bridge of the Eternal Conquest erupted in chaos. Officers shouted reports, desperately trying to locate their missing comrades. Sensor technicians ran diagnostic after diagnostic, convinced their equipment must be malfunctioning. But the readings were clear. 300 ships, nearly 100,000 soldiers, had been erased from existence in the span of a heartbeat. "Where did they go?" Verkith shouted over the noise. "What happened to them?" "Unknown," Kethver replied, his composure finally cracking. "Our sensors show nothing. No weapons fire, no impact, nothing. They simply ceased to exist." Far away in the Geneva Command Center, Dr. Patricia Lang watched her monitors with barely contained excitement. The phase shift technology was working perfectly, even better than the simulations had predicted. 300 targets successfully displaced, reported Lieutenant Nathan Cole, the tactical officer. They are now existing approximately 3 seconds out of sync with normal spacetime. Completely stable. Completely harmless. Commander Lisa Hartwell nodded approvingly. Power consumption. Well, within acceptable limits. We can maintain the displacement field indefinitely, or we can release them at any time. Keep them displaced for now. Let the Drellayans wonder what happened. Lisa turned to the communications officer. "Any response from the enemy fleet?" "Their communications are in chaos, Commander. They appear to be in a state of panic." Lisa allowed herself a small smile. The first phase of the defense had gone exactly as planned, back in the Drellian fleet. Admiral Kethver struggled to restore order. He issued commands rapidly, pulling the remaining ships into a tighter formation and ordering all weapons to full readiness. Whatever had attacked them would not find the Empire so easily surprised again. "All ships, maintain formation and continue advance," he ordered. "Weapons free. Fire at anything that moves." They traveled for another hour before the second attack came. This time, it was not a mysterious energy field. This time, the humans showed them something more traditional, somehow more terrifying. Missiles appeared from nowhere, seemingly materializing out of empty space. Thousands of them, moving at speeds that should have been impossible, weaving through the Drellian formation with perfect precision. They did not merely strike their targets. They selected them, prioritizing command vessels and weapons platforms with an intelligence that spoke of advanced AI guidance. "Return fire," Kethver screamed. "All ships, return fire." The Drellian fleet unleashed everything it had. Plasma cannons roared, energy beams sliced through space. Defensive systems worked overtime trying to track the incoming threats. They destroyed hundreds of missiles, maybe thousands. But it was not enough. 200 more ships died in the onslaught, and still the human lead had not shown itself. Verkith grabbed Kethver by the arm. "Admiral, we must reconsider. We have lost 500 ships, and we have not even seen the enemy. This is not a battle. This is a slaughter." Kethver's eyes burned with fury and wounded pride. "The Drellian Empire does not retreat. We will find these humans, and we will destroy them." "With what?" "Our fleet is being dismantled piece by piece. We still have 2,500 ships, more than enough to overwhelm any defense." But even as he spoke, the sensors detected something new. The human defense fleet was finally moving, emerging from behind the gas giant the locals called Jupiter. 212 vessels, just as intelligence had reported. They were smaller than Drellian ships, but designed sleeker and more compact. Kethver studied the tactical display with growing unease. The human ships were not attacking. They were not even positioning for battle. They were simply watching, waiting, as if they had all the time in the universe. "What are they doing?" he muttered on the human flagship Endurance. Commander Lisa Hartwell was asking herself the same question, but for different reasons. "The Drellans are still advancing," Nathan Cole reported. "They have lost 500 ships, and they are still coming." Lisa shook her head slowly. "They really are stubborn. Deploy the second wave of drones. Let them know what they are dealing with." Patricia Lang activated the next system, and suddenly, the space around the Drellian fleet was filled with small, fast-moving objects. They were not weapons, at least not directly. They were jammers, designed to interfere with Drellian communications and targeting systems. Within minutes, the Dralian fleet could not talk to itself. Ships fired blindly, sometimes hitting their own allies. Formation broke down as captains lost contact with their commanders, and then the human fleet moved. They did not attack in a traditional sense. They flowed around the Dralian formation like water around stones, striking weak points and withdrawing before any response could be organized. Human pilots, their reflexes enhanced by neural interfaces, anticipated Dralian movements before they happened. How are they so fast? Kethfer demanded, watching his tactical display with growing horror. How do they know where we will be before we move? The answer was simple, though he would never fully understand it. The human pilots were not reacting to Dralian movements. They were predicting them, using AI systems that had been trained on centuries of combat data from dozens of species. The Dralians were fighting yesterday's war. The humans were fighting tomorrow's. By the time the Dralian fleet limped past the orbit of Mars, they had lost another 300 ships, and the Battle of Saturn had not even begun. The Dralian fleet regrouped in the shadow of Saturn, using the massive planet's gravity well to mask their position while they assessed their losses. Admiral Kethfer stood in the command center of the Eternal Conquest, staring at the damage reports with eyes that had grown hollow over the past several hours. Of the 3,000 ships that had entered the Sol system, only 2,200 remained operational. 800 had been destroyed, disabled, or removed from existence by weapons the Dralians could not understand. And they had not even reached Earth yet. Ambassador Verketh approached carefully. He had seen Kethfer angry before, seen him frustrated and determined, but he had never seen him afraid. Until now, Admiral Verketh said quietly, perhaps it is time to reconsider our position. Kethfer did not respond immediately. He continued staring at the displays, watching the human fleet hold position near the asteroid belt. They were not pursuing. They were not pressing their advantage. They were simply waiting. Why do they not attack? Kethfer asked finally. They have us at their mercy. Why did they wait? It was a good question, and Verketh did not have an answer. The humans were behaving unlike any enemy the Dralians had ever faced. They did not seem interested in total destruction. They did not seem driven by hatred or conquest. They were simply defending their territory with cold, calculated efficiency. Perhaps they are giving us a chance to retreat, Verketh suggested. Kethfer's scales flushed dark with anger. The Dralian Empire does not retreat. Then, what would you have us do? Continue forward and lose more ships to weapons we cannot counter? The Admiral turned to face Verketh directly. His 4 eyes were bloodshot with fatigue and stress, but behind them burned the fierce pride that had made him the greatest military leader in Dralian history. We still outnumber them 10-1, Kethfer said. Their technology may be superior, but numbers have weight. If we can close to direct combat range, we can overwhelm them through sheer force. And if we cannot close the distance, then we die with honor. But I will not return to the homeworld and tell the Emperor that we fled from a species with 200 ships. Verketh understood. This was no longer about conquest or military strategy. This was about pride, about the very identity of the Dralian Empire. Kethfer would rather die than admit defeat to what he still saw as a lesser species. The fleet reformed into an attack wedge. The largest ships at the center, smaller vessels providing screening on the flanks. It was a classic Dralian formation designed for maximum firepower concentration and rapid breakthrough.
Ow.
All ships advance at maximum speed, Kethfer ordered. Do not stop for anything. Our objective is the human flagship. If we can destroy their command structure, the rest will fall. The Dralian fleet surged forward, engines burning at full power. They left the cover of Saturn behind and drove straight toward the waiting human vessels. Commander Lisa Hartwell watched them come with something close to admiration. She had to respect their courage, even if she could not understand their stubbornness. They had seen what human weapons could do. They had lost a quarter of their fleet without inflicting a single casualty, and still they came. All batteries stand ready, she ordered. Captain Santos, prepare your boarding teams. Henry Santos acknowledged from the assault bay where his Marines waited. They were equipped with the latest powered armor. their movements enhanced by mechanical servos that made them stronger and faster than any unaugmented human. Each Marine carried enough firepower to take on a small army. "Ready and eager, Commander," Santos reported. "My people have been waiting a long time for a real fight." Lisa almost smiled at that. Human soldiers were strange creatures. They did not enjoy war, not exactly, but they had a fierce need to prove themselves, to test their training against real opponents. The Dralians would give them that opportunity. "Launch drones," Lisa commanded. Standard interception pattern. The first wave of combat drones swept forward to meet the Dralian charge. They were small and fast, each one carrying a single high-yield weapon designed to disable rather than destroy. The humans still hoped to avoid unnecessary casualties. Even at this stage, the Dralians had learned from their earlier encounters. They maintained tight formation, overlapping their shields to create a solid wall of defensive energy. The drones found it difficult to penetrate, their weapons splashing harmlessly against the combined barrier. "They are adapting," Nathan Cole observed. "Shield coordination is much improved." Lisa nodded. "Good for them." Switch to Plan 7. Plan 7 involved the weapons that Dr. Patricia Lang had been most excited about. The gravity disruptors. They did not damage ships directly. Instead, they created localized fluctuations in gravitational force, causing vessels to lurch, to collide with their neighbors. The effect on the Dralian formation was immediate and devastating. Ships that had been flying in perfect coordination suddenly found themselves pulled in random directions. Collisions occurred throughout the fleet, shields failing under the impact of friendly vessels, and into this chaos, the human fleet finally advanced. The battle that followed would be studied for centuries. Human ships wove through the Dralian formation like dancers, their movements so precise that they seemed choreographed. They fired in perfect synchronization, each shot calculated to cause maximum disruption with minimum energy expenditure. AELIAN. Gunners tried to track the human vessels, but they moved too fast, changed direction too quickly. By the time a targeting solution was achieved, the human ship had already moved to a new position. "This is impossible," Kethver growled. "No pilots can mow V like that." He was right, in a sense. No normal pilots could move like that. But human pilots were not normal. Their neural interfaces connected them directly to their ships, making the vessels extensions of their own bodies. They did not fly their ships. They became their ships, and then the Marines arrived. Assault shuttles punched through weakened sections of Dralian shields, latching onto holes with magnetic clamps. Within seconds, breaching charges blew holes in armored plating, and human soldiers poured into the alien vessels. Captain Santos led the assault on the Dralian heavy cruiser Void Striker. He was first through the breach, his armor absorbing a dozen shots from startled Dralian defenders. He returned fire with calm precision, his weapons cutting through the alien soldiers like a farmer harvesting grain. "Secure the bridge," he ordered his team. "Non-lethal protocols, if possible. We want prisoners." The Dralians fought bravely, but they were outmatched. Human armor was too strong for their standard weapons. Human reflexes, enhanced by years of genetic and technological modification, were too fast for their targeting systems. One by one, the boarding teams secured their objectives. On the Eternal Conquest, Admiral Kethver received reports of boardings across his fleet. 17 ships had been captured already, their crews subdued by human Marines who seemed unstoppable. The battle was no longer a contest. It was a demonstration. "We have lost 1,800 ships," his executive officer reported, voice hollow with shock. "The humans have lost 12. Verketh placed a hand on Kethver's shoulder. "Admiral, enough. We must retreat or we will lose everything." For a long moment, Kethver did not respond. He stared at the tactical display, watching the symbols representing Dralian ships wink out one by one. Everything he had believed about military power, about the invincibility of the Empire, was crumbling before his eyes. "Signal the fleet," he said finally, each word seeming to cause him physical pain. "All ships retreat to hyperspace. Regroup at the staging point in the Keth system." The order went out, and the surviving Dralian vessels began to disengage. The human fleet let them go, making no attempt to prevent the retreat. They had made their point. On the Endurance, Lisa Hartwell watched the Dralians flee and felt no joy. She never did, not really. War was necessary sometimes, but it was never something to celebrate. Casualties? She asked. 12 ships lost, Commander. 437 personnel. Medical teams are recovering survivors now. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment. 437 families would receive news today that their loved ones had died defending Earth. It was a small number by the standards of interstellar war, but every single one was a tragedy. And the Dralians. Approximately 40,000 confirmed dead. Another 100,000 captured aboard disabled vessels. The rest are retreating. See that the prisoners are treated humanely. Full medical care, proper food and shelter. We are not savages. Nathan Cole nodded and began issuing the orders. The battle was over. But the work was just beginning. The Galactic Council chamber was more crowded than it had been in living memory. Representatives from every species with diplomatic standing had sent delegations. And even some species without formal recognition had found ways to observe. News of the Dralian defeat had spread across the galaxy like wildfire, and everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Ambassador Verketh stood at the central speaking platform, but his posture was very different from his appearance a month ago. His scales had faded to a sickly gray, and his 4 eyes were dull with exhaustion and shame. Beside him stood Commander Lisa Hartwell, wearing the dress uniform of the United Earth Defense Force, High Counselor Yalmara. His crystal form shimmered with colors that might have indicated satisfaction or perhaps merely interest. Ambassador Verkeith, please present THE terms of your surrender. Verketh's voice was barely audible as he spoke. The Dralian Empire formally apologizes for its unprovoked aggression against the planet Earth. We accept full responsibility for the conflict and all casualties that resulted. He paused, gathering himself. We agree to all terms set forth by the human government. Yalmara asked. Lisa stepped forward, her bearing confident but not arrogant. She had spent considerable time thinking about this moment, about what message humanity wanted to send to the galaxy. The terms are as follows, she said, her voice clear and steady. First, the Dralian Empire will reduce its military fleet by 80%. The remaining vessels will be sufficient for self-defense and patrol duties, but not for aggressive action against other species. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. This was significant, but not unusual. Most surrender terms included military restrictions. Second, the Dralian Empire will pay reparations to Earth for the costs of the conflict. These reparations will be spread over 20 years to avoid undue economic hardship. More murmurs, but still nothing surprising. Third and finally, the Dralian Empire will formally recognize humanity's right to exist and expand peacefully within the galaxy. Any future aggression against human territory or citizens will be considered an act of war. That was it. The council waited for more, but Lisa had finished speaking. The Philithian delegate spoke up, his whiskers twitching with confusion. That is all? You do not demand their territory? Their resources? Their technology? Lisa shook her head. Humanity has no interest in building an empire. We did not seek this conflict, and we take no pleasure in our victory. We simply want to be left alone to explore, to trade, and to live in peace. But you could claim so much more, the Philithian pressed. Your military superiority is now proven beyond doubt. The Dralians are helpless before you. That is precisely why we choose restraint, Lisa replied. Power without wisdom is merely destruction. We have enough destruction in our history. We have no desire to add to it. The chamber fell silent as the delegates processed this. It was not the response they had expected. Conquerors did not show mercy. Winners did not limit their demands. And yet the humans seemed to genuinely mean what they said. High Counselor Yalmara was the first to recover. The terms are accepted and witnessed by this council. Let it be recorded that the conflict between the Dralian Empire and the human civilization of Earth has been resolved. The formal proceedings continued for several more hours, with documents signed and protocols observed, but the real conversations happened afterward, in the quiet corners of the council complex where delegates gathered to discuss what they had witnessed. Verketh found himself approached by Lisa Hartwell as he was preparing to leave. He tensed, expecting anger or gloating, but the human's expression was thoughtful, almost sympathetic. "Ambassador, may I speak with you privately?" Verketh hesitated, then nodded. They walked together to a small observation deck overlooking the station's garden level. For a long moment, neither spoke. "I must ask you something," Verketh said finally. "Why did you spare us? Your weapons could have destroyed every ship we sent. You could have followed us to our homeworld and burned it clean. Why did you not?" Lisa considered the question carefully before answering. "Because that is not who we are. Not anymore, at least." She gazed out at the garden, where plants from 100 worlds grew side by side. "Humans have a long history of war, Ambassador. We fought each other for thousands of years before we reached the stars. We nearly destroyed our own world more than once. And this made you merciful? It taught us the cost of cruelty. We learned that empires built on blood do not last. We learned that enemies can become allies, and that today's conquered foe is tomorrow's resentful rebel." Lisa turned to face Verketh directly. "We could have destroyed you, but then we would always have to watch for Dralian revenge. This way, perhaps in a generation or two, we might be friends instead." Verketh was quiet for a long moment. In his entire career as a diplomat, he had never encountered thinking like this. The Dralian approach was simple. Crush your enemies completely, so they can never threaten you again. But the humans seem to believe in a different path. "There is another reason," Lisa added, a slight smile crossing her face. "We were hoping you might become trading partners eventually. Your agricultural technology is actually quite impressive. We have been looking for better methods of growing food in low-gravity environments." Verketh stared at her in disbelief. "You defeated our entire military force, and now you want to discuss farming equipment? We are a practical people, Ambassador. It is another thing that makes us dangerous." Despite everything, despite the shame and the loss and the utter collapse of everything he had believed about his empire's power, Verketh found himself laughing. It was a strange, rusty sound, but genuine. "You are the strangest species I have ever encountered," he said. "We get that a lot." In the weeks and months that followed, the consequences of the failed Dralian invasion rippled across the galaxy. Other species that had been considering aggressive action against Earth quietly shelved their plans. Trade delegations began arriving at human space stations, eager to establish positive relationships with this peculiar species. Military academies across known space updated their curricula. New courses were added, not about human weapons or tactics, but about human psychology. Instructors taught their students that the humans were not simply powerful. They were unpredictable. They could be peaceful for generations, content to explore and trade and build. But when threatened, they responded with overwhelming force and absolute determination. The key lesson, repeated in classrooms on 1,000 worlds, was simple. Never, under any circumstances, invade Earth. The humans took it personally. Commander Lisa Hartwell returned to her office in Geneva. To her simple desk and her photographs and her plant that still needed watering, there would be other threats, other challenges. But for now, Earth was safe, and humanity's place in the galaxy was secure. She looked out her window at the sun setting over Lake Geneva, painting the water gold and orange, just as it had on the morning when she first received news of the Dralian approach. The world was beautiful, worth protecting, worth fighting for, but it was also worth sharing. Humanity had not reached the stars to build walls around itself. They had come to explore, to learn, to grow, and maybe, just maybe, to help the rest of the galaxy do the same. After all, they were a practical people. And the most practical thing of all was to make friends, not enemies. Lisa smiled, turned from the window, and went back to work. There was always more work to be done.